Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Nick. I work for Labster, and thank you for joining us today. This is our weekly webinar where I'll give you a quick rundown of what we've experienced, what we do, some background on us, and what we can do to help given your situation, whether you're in higher education, high school, community college, a large university in the United States or Europe, anywhere in the world. If you guys have any questions, I will have a Q&A at the end. Everyone is muted, but if you want to go into the questions section, please post all questions there and I'll make sure to cover everything at the end. But again, thank you all for joining. And without further ado, I'll get started on Labster. So again, my name is Nick and I'll be running you through this. Who we are, we're Labster. We work exclusively in education, bringing all types of schools online for students in their sciences. Due to COVID, a lot of sciences have gone online, but prior to COVID, we were very successful as well in helping students, and I'll get further into the studies as we progress here. We'll also cover how it works. So if you're interested either on a course level, potentially your department level, your high school level, university, community college level, how we would implement that and what the steps are to actually get this into your courses or into your school if this is something that meets your standards and something that your students would like. And again, at the end, we will cover a Q&A and what the next steps would look like for that as well. So a little background on Labster. Our goal was to reach as many students as we possibly can who may or may not have the resources given their geographic location or socioeconomic background to get them in a setting where they would have access to $1 million lab anytime and anywhere. Now, the ironic part of COVID is the anywhere piece. And that's something that we've been dealing with, and we can get you up to speed regardless of your situation, whether you have an outbreak or if you're totally fine, what the benefits would be if you're fully in person, if you're in a hybrid setting, or any scenario that you're dealing with, we've dealt with. But as far as a history on us, we were founded in 2013 at the University of Copenhagen, and our co-founder was in charge of incoming freshmen for their, or excuse me, he was in charge of science labs for their incoming students for non-majors. And basically what the goal was to get as many students engaged with the learning that they possibly could. So the students that were either came from a background where they didn't have access to a lab and got into university and hadn't seen this equipment before, he wanted to have lab run smoother. So essentially this was a pre-lab exercise to make his life easier. So when students came to the lab, they'd already gone over a similar scenario, and now they'd be dealing with the actual equipment where they'd have to interact with the actual physical properties of a wet lab. So some things that are built into our labs, if you haven't had time to get in here and run through some of our lab sets or some of our content, we want students to be able to learn from failure. So we want students to be able to fail in our lab. So failure is built into all of our simulations. We want students to be able to have lab accidents in a safe environment where they're not ruining your lab, they're not endangering themselves or others, and they're not costing you money either in your labs with materials, reagents, or actual equipment themselves. So prior to getting into the lab, most students would run through Labster, then get into lab and be much more familiar with what they would be trying to accomplish in the actual wet lab themselves. Learning protocol, with that being said, with lab accidents involved, we still want protocol to be a top priority for our simulations as well. So students won't be cutting any corners. They'll be interacting, you'll see this slide here, they're interacting with each compound to complete the actual experiment themselves. So before students actually get into the lab, they do have to go through safety protocols as well. They have to put on a lab coat, goggles if needed, gloves as well. So there aren't any corners cut as far as safety goes or protocol. And then one of the benefits that we have in a virtual setting is get down to the animation level, to the molecular level. So we can have students interact with equipment as well as animation. So here you'll see a student interacting with a chemical compound and interacting with actually the electrons. So they're interacting on the molecular level, whereas they wouldn't be able to do that in a wet lab, but it'll give them some sort of conceptual understanding of the content that they're actually covering while doing the simulation in the lab themselves. So with that being said, we have, prior to COVID, Like I said before, we were used almost exclusively as a pre-lab exercise or in a hybrid setting, so as a pre-lecture or post-lecture. And we've had a number of feedback components and studies that were associated with student engagement that we'll get into, as well as decrease in failure rates, which I'll show you at a future slide here. But here are some of the slides on this slide, just shows some of the schools that we have been working with across the world. So again, if you're in higher education or high school, large university or community college, we've kind of been through it all, and we'll be able to walk you through this. As far as our current catalog goes, we have about 140 simulations that are active right now. We're able to bring the majority of your science classes online, as well as labs. So if you're forced into an online situation, we'd be able to cover all your science courses. If you are in person and worried about going online, that's a scenario where you could use Labster as a pre-lab exercise to see if students like it. And we could see if there's a long-term benefit to that as well, for as partnership for maybe a multi-year option for you folks. If your students like this and if this is up to your standards for your teaching for your courses. You will have access to this. If you guys are interested, you'll have an access to our catalog. By the end of this, we'll get in touch with you, and throughout this presentation, I'll actually show you what pieces you'll have interactability with to actually demonstrate or demo our content to see if this is up to your standards. So here's a quick video of a number of our simulations. It's actually a video that's stitched together. It's not a simultaneous experiment. It just shows off some of the equipment that you'd be using or that your students would be using in your course, how they're interacting with it, how they're navigating through the lab, what some of the equipment looks like, what the feedback data looks like for the actual experiments themselves, how compounds are interacted, what some of the failures look like, as well as some of the interactive pieces like the lab pad there. Some of the advantages that we do have in the simulation level is really our creativity. We can speed up reactions. That's a big benefit for PCR, but you can speed up reactions and kind of go through time. You can visit exoplanets, whereas you can't do that in real life at this point in time. And of course, get down to the molecular level like we talked about earlier. But the sky's the limit as far as what we can create, and we're constantly developing new content. So what you see now as far as our catalog goes isn't what you'll see in 3, 6 months, 9 months, or a year. We're constantly developing new content. So if you're interested in our content, please stay up to speed with our marketing campaigns that go out, and don't ever hesitate to reach out to us. But again, this video is just a quick demo on what you'll have access to throughout a number of simulations and modules throughout our science catalog. So with that being said, let me show you guys what you'll have access to actually determine whether this is acceptable for your courses. So you can reach out to us and we'll set you up with a demo account on our faculty resources page. This is where you folks are going to get hands-on to figure out, okay, this is my course, how does this work? What do they deliver for content? Is it acceptable for my course? So say you are interested in general biology, and again, I'm not going to get too deep into the content. That's where you guys will come in, but I'll show you what options you have available when you do dive in here. So you want to check out general biology, say you want to check out cell structure, cell theory, and internal organelles. So you're going to get in here, you'll have a few options, one of which is to play through the simulation here on the right. That's going to be very similar, if not exactly similar, to the student experience with two exceptions. One of which is going to be the load time. Load time for students on the final product is between 30 and 60 seconds. The load time on the faculty resource page can be between a minute to 3 or 4 minutes, just based off the traffic on the servers for a faculty resource page. They are separate. The final paid product is much more up to speed, and the faculty resource page is very taxed right now, as you can imagine. A lot of courses are being forced online. Another option is to play a YouTube video. So the YouTube video is not interactable, but there is a benefit. You can actually speed up through time. You can pause. You can figure out where students may or may not have issues. You can check out the lab pad. But I would suggest, if you're interested in this in your course, to actually get in there and play through a simulation, maybe even for something that you don't instruct in, or maybe even for something that you struggled with as a student. So it would help you maybe better understand our actual approach to learning in the research that we put in on how to make these connections for students. But anyway, I just made a quick pause here because the lab pad is a main driver of the simulations, and students are going to spend some time on the lab pad themselves. So you'll become familiar with this, and I'll just do a quick rundown of the lab pad. So our scores are up here in the top left. Students are graded throughout the actual simulation themselves. So on the lab pad, this is where they'll answer the multiple choice questions. If the student gets it wrong, they'll be deducted points. So each quiz question is worth 10 points. They're deducted 2 points for every incorrect answer. So the lowest they can get is 2, the highest they can get is 10. The answers are randomized, so you can't just click through until you get it without that reflecting in your score. The progress percent up here is how much of the experiment they're actually completed. That's not their overall score, that's just how much progress they've made throughout the actual simulation themselves. The theories tab here, and I'm just going to back out for a second. I can't interact with it here just because it's a YouTube video, but this theories tab here is actually accessible to you here on the faculty resource page. And this is linked, all this is hyperlinked in the lab pad. So if I was able to click on that tab, this is the information that would be available. Again, it's all hyperlinked in the lab pad to keep students immersed in the data, as well as the experiment themselves. So anything that they need to actually answer the quiz questions or deduct some reasoning, any definitions or diagrams will be associated here on the lab pad. So I'm just showing you what options you'll have on the theories tab by giving you a quick rundown of the video. The media tab itself is actually going to give you any charts or graphs that students will need to answer maybe any of the quiz questions or interact with some of the molecules in the background. Any previous experimental data output points that they don't have immediate access to could be accessed on the media tab as well. And then the mission statement breaks down the gamified approach of what we're trying to do. So students are presented with a problem in all of our simulations. They then have to solve that problem through the scientific method, and that's broken down step by step on what they're trying to accomplish. Whether they deliver the results correctly or incorrectly is up to them, but it will give them a breakdown of what steps they're taking to actually solve this problem. So just back to the faculty resource page, I'll let this play out. Again, I'm not going to get too deep into the content because of the wide array of background I'm sure is on the webinar. But as far as the faculty resource page goes, you can play the video. The theories tab is down here in the bottom right. And the last option is actually to download a PDF. The PDF is going to give you, as the instructors and faculty, the quiz questions as well as the answers. So that's something that you can evaluate what students will be answering, and it'll reflect in the scores that are posed for your students upon completion as well. So students you'll have some control over what students will have access to. If this is integrated into your learning management system, the grading will be automated as well as a single sign-on for your instructors as well as the students. So students will go into your course shell, whether it's in Blackboard, Moodle, Canvas, or any other learning management systems. They would then log into their course, and Labster would be embedded in there. Their score would automatically pull your gradebook, and from there you have a few control options, one of which is how many times the students can actually take this. So you can take their first attempt score, you can allow multiple attempts and take their best score, or you can just set this as a completion requirement so students complete it maybe before a lab or just to suffice that they went through it, but that's up to you. There are some data output points too for the instructor on the teacher dashboard. You'd be able to go through your course to see which students are struggling with certain concepts as well as certain simulations. So you can do that for an individual student as well as the group of students that are in your course as well. So if you need to reconfigure your approach if students are falling behind on a given topic, it could give you some data points on how to adjust your course to help them progress throughout the science course. The last option would be to scroll down. You can read the About section. You can see what techniques are used in the lab, what the learning objectives are, and if there were any external collaborators who helped us develop the content. Another thing that'll be accessible to the students, so say a student is stuck during a simulation or doesn't know what to do, they interact with all the compounds and they can't get going. We do have chat support here in the bottom right. on our website. So this is available 24/7. Excuse me. The chat feature is available 24/7, and we have support all over the world. So given your time zone, it shouldn't matter. You'll have access to our support team to help students. Most tickets are completed within 45 minutes. I think we're in the 90 percentile for completed tickets for students who are stuck, as well as instructors too. And that is it for the faculty resource page. So again, this is what the main catalog looks like. And from here, you can dive deeper into your actual content, what you're teaching, and how you want to approach what you're teaching. So these are broken down by categories that we chose. And the core simulations are the most covered in these given courses. If you want to, for some reason, include something in Intro to Chemistry into your organic chemistry course, please treat this as an a la carte menu. However you want to build your course is we're here to help. We're not here to dictate what you put in your course. This is totally customizable to what you want and how you want to build your course. So with that being said, our next slide is some of the data points that we have. We have proven research that shows that Labster has improved learning outcomes for students. One of our more prominent studies was in Nature Biotech in 2014. There was a control study group of 160 students who were broken up into groups. One of which was just treated as normal with traditional learning techniques, lecture, lab. Then one was used with Labster, and the jump from traditional learning and Labster was significant enough. But the more important data point here was traditional teaching, excuse me, with the use of Labster. Those students had a 101% increase in their learning outcomes from just traditional teaching alone. So we really like to point to this to point out the fact that we're not trying to replace traditional teaching. We're really trying to supplement it in a way that students, in a language that students speak. So most students are of a different generation, as any generation of students are, but our learning approach is specifically geared towards a gamified video game environment where students are immersed in the actual content themselves, whereas they're not distracted. So everything from the lab pad being embedded, the students never need to leave the screen. They don't need to Google any answers, or excuse me, they don't need to Google either answers, or they don't need to look up any definitions at all. Everything is embedded in the actual simulation itself. In this study here, we'll send out to you folks to review. It's about 4 or 5 pages, but it's a very in-depth study that covers the learning outcomes for this study group. Another one that we did was a drop in student failure rates. This was at Cal State Northridge for an intro to biology course where they took a sample group where nothing else changed other than the fact that students enrolled in the course before Labster, and they did it in a traditional sense. And then students were introduced to Labster along with traditional teaching techniques, and their failure rates had dropped significantly. And again, we can send this out to you folks as well to review this. This one's about 3 or 4 pages, but if you guys are curious about what some of your goals are, maybe in adopting Labster, that's something that we'll work with you on as well. So if you want to increase student engagement, or maybe maximize how many students actually interact with Labster, or if you want to decrease failure rates to keep your department's enrollment numbers up, that's something we can work on too. If there's a really tough course where historically students have had issues passing the course, that's great and all, but the more students that pass that course, the more students that stay in science, and the more students that stay in science is our goal. We'll create more scientists in the world. So that's one of our goals. So this slide here just basically breaks down, okay, I teach this course, whether it be high school, higher education, whatever it might be. I teach this course and I don't know what to do, but I really like Labster's approach. You can send us your syllabus or your lab plan, and we can work with our education team to build a specific simulation based off how you teach your course. Each instructor is going to teach this differently, and we can customize this in any way, shape, or form that you need to. And you're not alone in this. So if this seems like too much, we're here to help. If not, it's totally self-serving as well. So we're here to help in either scenario. So you figure out what you want to do. Either use our education team, or you go through the simulations, either play through them yourselves, or at some point you figure out what you want to use for Labster. Okay, now I have the outline. What do I do? We come to an agreement. You get the contract signed. Either we have a few options. Either it can be an institution pay model, if you feel that the charges are unfair for the students to cover at this point in time, if you're forced online, or it can be a student pay model if this is going to be something that's going to maybe replace reagents or lab coats, safety materials, or your lab fees if you're forced online. Or if it's going to replace a book and you go to e-text, that might be an option too. There are a number of ways that institutions have justified which payment method they're going to go with, but in either direction, we can work with you to set that up. Once that's complete, we have streamlined this significantly since March. So anyone on this call who had used Labster previously, we have streamlined this, and it is much different than you've probably seen it if you've implemented this in your course in the last 6 months. So if you integrate this into your learning management system, it's going to be very self-serving. You get a common cartridge that the LTI integration takes about 10 minutes to complete with your learning management team. From there, you then get the common cartridge. You click, drag, upload it into your course, and then from your course, you have your course shell options on weighted grading on how much these are going to affect your students. Again, whether it's a completion requirement or first attempt score or multiple attempts, those are the options that you'll have at that point. And then just to tie this all together for you folks, so our goal is to create a realistic simulation. It's never going to replace a wet lab as far as manually interacting with equipment. That's never going to be replaced. But what we can do in simulations is limitless. But we can prepare students to get into the lab. We can give students an option to maybe gain access to equipment that they may or may not have at your institution as well. Even if you do have, maybe the time is limited, or due to COVID, the spacing is limited, so you have less students in lab. But we want to create a realistic environment for students so they can actually interact with this. They can be presented with real life stories, with real life problems, and then twist that into a video game environment where it's research based. We get students immersed in the actual animations on the molecular level, which you can't do in a wet lab. Get feedback for both you and for the students on how they're actually absorbing this information with interactive quizzes. And then, of course, give them the opportunity to fail in a safe learning environment where they can learn from their failures. Whereas lab can be a bit intimidating for incoming students, or maybe just the nervous students in general. But we want to create a failure-driven environment like most science environments are. Outside of that, recap, these are the access options for pricing. These are all posted on our website. And this institution access tab or column here, excuse me, is a bit deceiving. This is just an example at 60,000. It depends on a number of factors on what institution access is, but let me give you the definitions of what each one of these are. The full access is on a course-by-course basis. So a student enrolls in Biology 101 that you teach. Students will pay $99 for that course for access to Labster. Now, whether we sell that, if the students are paying for it, they have a few payment options. They can be presented with a swipe option to pay us directly, or if the bookstore is selling this and they want to use financial aid, we issue vouchers and license codes to the bookstore. So both for full and starter access, that would stay true. The difference between full and starter access, the full access includes all of our simulations, so you can include as many as you want in your course. The starter access is a limit of 8 simulations. There's another difference as well. There is not an integration feature included for the starter access. You'll be on our platform, Labster Direct, which has 2 differences. The integration piece, again, allows the automated grading, which I previously referenced, as well as the single sign-on in the embedded simulations within your course shell. So if you have the starter access, you'll just be on Labster Direct. It's not embedded. They'd have a different login, as well as you would have to import the grades into your course shell as well. Now, the more popular option the larger option, sometimes the more difficult option, but also sometimes the easier option to come to an agreement on will be the institution access. And again, this number is for an example. It depends on a number of factors, and if you have any questions, reach out to us. We can figure out what that number looks like. But on the definition basis of what the institution access is it's more of a Netflix model. So we give you 12 months of access to Labster for a certain amount of money. You incorporate any and all the courses you want here. There's no limit to how many courses you use. There's no limit to how many simulations or how many students would enroll in that as well. So it's a multi-semester 12-month license that would cover all of your science courses. And if you have any questions on that, again, just reach out to us and we can get you in touch with the appropriate people to get that information in front of you, what that looks like, what the steps look like, and that too. It is very similar to integrating that is very similar to the full access, but on a larger scale. So I've covered the access options. That should be most of the information that you folks need, but I did want to leave some time for a Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, please put them in the questions box. Well, there is one question here that says, how do you turn on the audio? I hope that isn't the audio to hear me. Otherwise, I just talked to myself for 26 minutes. But as far as the audio, maybe you're referring to the audio on the on the faculty resource page, and I had to turn it off for a presentation, but the audio will be on there just like a YouTube video would be. If you mute it or unmute it, that'll be there. As far as the simulation goes, the audio is active from the minute you get in there. So if you're having audio difficulties, you may want to check your audio settings, whether you have a headset plugged in or if it's transmitting maybe to a Bluetooth speaker in a different room. But hopefully that covers your question there. Also, the webinar is recorded too. So if you had issues with hearing this webinar, we're going to send out the audio, or excuse me, the video recording with audio. So we will be able to cover that for you too. Or you'll be able to access it that way. You just give me 1 second. This question bar is very small. Okay. Here's the audio one. That's complete. Is there any way to ensure that the student is doing the work and not someone else? The students are issued a license code that's associated with their account in your course shell. There's no other way to tell if the student is doing it other than the grade that's popped out from their account. Students can't really cheat on this. They do have to play through it. It's kind of like reading a book. It's either you did it or not, and you're going to get feedback on it. You can't skip through anything. You do have to answer all the questions before you progress through any part of the simulation. So the student would have to play through it start to finish. As far as ensuring when the student did it or someone else did it, that'd be difficult to do, but it is associated with their grade and their course shell. So any issues that you'd have with Labster would be very similar to anything else that you're presenting to them at that point online. Sorry, give me 1 second. What do you find is the length of time the student needs on average to finish a simulation? That's a great question. It depends on the content, but on average, the students are going to spend between 35 and 55 minutes on a given topic, depending on how well do they know their the content as well as how they interact with it. But on average, it's between 35 and 55 minutes. And that covers about 1 to 2 lectures worth of content, as well as 1 lab practical. Can a teacher purchase this for themselves if the science department can't purchase? Yes, that's a good question. So again, on the most basic level, if you're an instructor, high school, higher ed, whatever it might be, in your department isn't approving this, this is something that can be purchased on an individual course level for your students. It's just price per student per course. So those are the two variables. Excuse me. And that'll pop out your price point depending on which access you want. But yes, this is available again on a course level, on a department level, as well as an institution or site-wide level too. Right, that's all I'm seeing for the questions piece. If you guys have anything else, please please enter it there. Sorry, I do have to scroll through this to see if anyone. All right, excellent. So there's not too, I don't see any more questions on here. If I missed them, I apologize, but I'm going through this here. So basically to wrap this up, all the attendees here will be followed up with an email from our marketing team to see if, you know, if you have any further questions, maybe something I didn't cover throughout this call or webinar. And either tomorrow, or excuse me, either today or tomorrow, you'll get a follow-up email. So any additional questions, we're happy to help. If you are interested in connecting with Labster, you can always go to the chat feature to figure out which sales rep would help you out, depending on where you are in the world. Again, if it's North America, Europe, Asia, wherever you are, we are very familiar with the obstacles that you're facing. So thank you so much for your time, and I do hopefully look forward to you and your students using Labster. So best of luck, and thank you so much for attending.